be said inside. A real pertinent concern. There has been an overarching concern about whether or not there are weapons present.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our workshop. I'd like to ask everyone to go on mute if you could. You've just joined workshop Seed Planting, Sprouts, and Microgreens. Welcome. My name's Robert Cervelli. I'm one of the organizers for Transition Bay. So this evening, we've got a 90-minute workshop lined up. I'll be presenting. Before I get into that, though, I want to just give a couple of minutes, a little bit of background on Transition Bay. We're part of the International Transition Movement, which started in 2005 in England, very quickly went viral around the world. I think there's some 90 transition initiatives in Canada alone, at least 50 countries around the world. The whole idea is working at the local community level, building resilience for the future around what was the 3 E's: economy, environment, and ecology. And you could almost now add a 4th E, which is equity. So that's a lot of what we do. We do programs, workshops like tonight. Go to our website. You'll see a whole lot of other stuff that we've done in the past, some of the upcoming events that we're planning, and I'll announce those towards the end of a couple more workshops coming up. But that's what we do. We work primarily in St. Margaret's Bay, but we've been actually able to advise other transition groups across the Maritimes. And we are looking always for volunteers. So don't hesitate to step up if you want to help with some of the things that we've got going on all the time with Transition Bay. We are recording this event, just so you know, you probably heard the announcement on Zoom. We are going to take this onto our Facebook page so that people can see it after the workshop. During the workshop, what I'd like to ask is if people could put questions in the chat box. And then also you'll be able to, at the end of the presentation, we can have some discussion and do Q&A then as well. So that would be great if we could do it that way. So what I'm going to be doing is partly sharing my screen and partly just giving a show and tell. And we're going to start out with seeds, and we're going to wrap up with sprouts, microgreens, and I might even be munching on a few while we're doing that because I've got a lot of them here that we've been growing. What I'd like to do first is start out with my slides. And Mel, are we able to see that okay?
Yeah, that looks great, Bob.
Okay. So, oh, of course, there we go. First thing I want to do before we get into actually working with seeds, I want to give you a little bit of religion about seeds here. I'm a botanist by academic training, worked a number of horticultural operations. I manage a 2-acre micro farm, et cetera, et cetera. And I've always felt like seeds actually are a miracle. When you really start to think about it, you've got an encapsulated dormant organism produced by nature in mass. It's encapsulated, it's dormant, it can sit there for a very long time waiting for something to happen, for conditions to become just right that it can start to grow. And it's just sitting there. It's got its food supply. It's got a rudimentary miniature plant, an embryo. And so it's actually quite amazing when you think about seeds and how well they're packaged. And it just represents potential, sheer potential in my mind. Lots of interesting things. These are the largest seeds in the world. Coco de Mer comes from a palm tree in the Seychelles Islands. And when you look at it, it's starts to be kind of obvious that something that big is probably meant to float around in the ocean for a very long time and land on a sandy beach somewhere and then germinate and become a palm tree. The smallest seed in the world, on the other hand, we like to think it's the mustard seed. I think there's, biblical reference and all
Okay, Bert.
about the smallest seed being the mustard seed, but it's actually not. I found this graphic, which is, there's the mustard seeds, and down below are grains of salt, table salt, okay? There's poppy seeds are smaller than mustard. There's a plant called Wolfia, very tiny seeds. And the smallest seeds of all are almost microscopic, are orchid seeds. So it's quite interesting when you really just start to look at the range of what Mother Nature's been able to produce. This plant came from seeds that are 32,000 years old. You can imagine that, and what life was like on the planet 32,000 years ago. But it sat dormant there, ready to grow, ready for the conditions to become just right for it to germinate and start to grow. So what I'd like to do is just give you a little bit more sense and maybe a little bit of anatomy of seeds. This is a spinach plant going to seed. It's called bolting, putting up a seed stalk. Every plant, and you start to appreciate it when you work with plants long enough, you start to appreciate that the life's goal of every plant is to produce seeds. That's why they're there. That's what they want to do. In many cases, once they produce seeds, the plant dies off, particularly most of your annuals, even the perennials. So when you're harvesting plants, you can see that in some cases, you're short-circuiting their whole goal in life. You're pulling carrots out of the ground or whatever, because their goal is to produce seeds, and they can be quite prolific at it as well. So a little bit of anatomy. I'd mentioned that it's a perfectly packaged dormant potential. So there's two main kinds of seeds, monocots and dicots. This is a monocot, which is basically corn, all of your grasses, anything in that plant family. The green part is basically that embryo, and the white part is the stored starch, which as soon as it germinates, enzymes go to work and it starts converting that starch into sugars, other types of compounds that the embryo can then just absorb right away and start to use as its first kind of booster into the world. With a dicot, which is the majority of the types of vegetables, you've got that tiny little embryo in the middle. And then you've got two halves that are called cotyledons. That's the stored starch again. That is going to be that initial food supply. So when a seed germinates, that embryo starts to grow and the cotyledons start to feed it the supplies that it needs. So when you see that first early germinant coming out of the ground, you're going to see round leaves, depending on the type of plant, and usually smooth round leaves. Those are those cotyledons. So they've provided all of the starch to the growing embryo. They then expand and they become the first leaves, called the seed leaves. And then from the very center, what's called the apical, the apex, is where the true leaves now start to come out. So the tomato in the left, you can see it actually starts to look like tomato leaves compared to the cotyledons or the seed leaves. So that's something to watch for. It's a key part of when a seedling is starting to now live on its own. It's starting to now have enough leaf surface area that it can photosynthesize. It's sort of off being weaned by the cotyledon food storage, and it's now going to start growing on its own. So one of the things I want to talk about first off is how do you start and maintain your own seed library? And how do you do it well so that you're going to maximize the benefit? But before I got to get before I do that, I want to give you a quick peek at the world's largest seed library. This was built by the Norwegian government, I think somewhere around 25 years ago in Svalbard, way up in the Arctic Circle. They basically dug a tunnel way back into the mountainside in permafrost, permanently frozen ground, so that it's effectively a refrigerator without needing refrigeration. So it went way back in there. Then this was a world service. So they put the world out to seed banks all around the world, come and store part of your library here in Svalbard. And it's all meticulously cataloged, racked, organized. I think about 2-3 years ago, they passed the 1 million mark, meaning over 1 million varieties of seed are stored in this seed library. And it's for the benefit of humanity, because we need a deep and vast kind of germplasm, very many types of seeds. We've lost a lot of the land races, a lot of the heirloom varieties over the past few decades alone that have evolved and that have been bred in various parts of the world. So for example, just one story, we had a chance, my family and I, to visit the Hopi Reservation down in New Mexico quite a while ago, actually. But when we were there, we learned that they have over many centuries bred a variety of corn. This is now almost desert. They plant the corn in the spring during spring rains that only come once. The soil, the rain flows down the valleys, the arroyos, and moistens the sand. They plant the corn. It's the only moisture that corn gets for its entire growing season. Yet they're able to harvest quite a nice crop of corn. And clearly that's adapted specifically for those conditions. So you got lots of different types of plants adapted to very particular conditions. And that's why seed libraries like this are very important. So what I'd like to show you is how I keep my seed library. And I'm hoping this is going to work. So here is one of my boxes. It's just like a plastic file box. This is one of 3 that I have. And inside, there's a Ziploc bag. And then inside the Ziploc bag, I have alphabetically all of my different kinds of seeds lined up in here. In this case, this is box number 1. It starts with arugula, artichoke, all the things that begin with A.
Bob, we can't see what you're doing. We still see your slide.
Oh, I am very sorry. You're absolutely right. I have to bounce back and forth. Okay. I'm hoping you can see this much better. Let me start over. This is one of 3 boxes that I have for my seed library. Just a plastic file box and a Ziploc bag inside. And inside, I've got all my seeds lined up alphabetically. So the first ones are arugula, artichoke, seed packages. Well, it probably works its way back into the fennel towards the end, or escarole. So it's all alphabetical, and I've got 2 more like this, okay? One important thing I want to point out is it's a Ziploc bag. Keep the moisture out. Inside the bag, I have a package of desiccant to suck up any moisture that's in the bag. And I'm going to talk about this on a number of occasions here. That's 2 most important things with a seed library. Keep your seeds dry, keep them cool. And they're going to last a heck of a long time. So the desiccant part is important. Keeping them in a tight sealed bag is important, and keeping them cool. I keep mine in a refrigerator. all year long. So that's what a seed library can look like. And that way you can keep seeds. I'm going to talk a little bit more about how long they'll keep. You can keep them actually quite long, depending on the variety. Some keep longer than others. Then question becomes, where do you get your seeds? I get mine from two places. I buy them and we make them in the garden. We save seeds from the garden. Buying seeds, this is the time of year. So I've just gone through my seed libraries in the past week. I've looked at what have I run out of, what seeds are too old and they're not germinating well enough. And so then what do I need to go out and purchase? So I just bought some seeds yesterday, actually, at Halifax Seed. I'm going to be ordering some online at 2 or 3 other seed companies. And this is the time of year to do that. Look at what you need, what you want, figure out who's got it. And one thing I could recommend is that buying seed in bulk is a heck of a lot cheaper than buying individual packages. Much more economical, particularly if you have the confidence you're going to be able to keep seed for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years, which you can do if you're storing it properly. Or if you have friends, you can buy in bulk. So here's, for example, a big bag of beets. Beet seeds, Detroit Red, very nice variety, 125 grams, comes from Halifax Seed, way more than I'm going to use in 1 year, but I know that I can keep it. And the important thing, when you buy seeds, put the year on there. Very first thing I do when I get home is I write the year. So I just bought some, I said, I wrote 22 on there. This bag says 19. So I know this bag now is 3 years old, these seeds in here. That's important. Unfortunately, most seed companies do not date the packages of seed. I can never quite figure out why you do that. So buy in bulk as much as you can, and know that you're going to be able to store them. And you'll save a lot of money that way. The other way, of course, is saving seed from the garden. And I'm just going to jump right back to the slides real quick. This is a kale plant that's gone to seed. Nice flowers, bees love it, going to pollinate the heck out of it, collect all the nectar. And from that one plant, we're going to get an enormous amount of seeds. As those seed heads germinate, they'll form these pods. The pods start to dry out. At some point, we'll just cut the main stem right down at the ground level and hang the whole thing upside down in a dry place inside until it dries out thoroughly. Then we put a garbage bag around the whole thing and just start shaking like heck. And before you know it, you've got enough seed for the nation. It's quite amazing how much seed you can produce just from one plant. This is, as an example, this is parsnip seed, okay? And this is only half of the amount that we produced from one parsnip, letting it go to seed. And that's enough. I don't even know what I'm gonna do with all that seed. I mean, I'll show you at the end, St. Margaret's Transition Bay has set up a seed library at the St. Margaret's Crossroads. So a lot of it's going to go in there. The only issue with parsnips is it's one of the shortest lived seeds. You can only use them really for one season, but we got a lot of seed. Here is an example of collard greens. You can see a heck of a lot of seed in there. And that was one plant. So some plants, it's super easy to collect way more seed than you'll ever need. Other plants, it's a little more difficult when you get into tomatoes and peppers and that sort of thing. And I don't really have the time this evening to get into seed saving. And we'll have to save that for another workshop, unless there's specific questions at the end. So I'd mentioned storing seeds, keeping them cool and dry is the most important thing. Then it comes down to lifespan. Some seeds last much, much longer than others. There's tables available you can find online of which seeds last longer than others. My experience is, generally speaking, other than I mentioned parsnip, which is the shortest lived seed, I can get at least 3 to 5 years lifespan out of seeds the way that I store them. Some cases we're still using seeds that are 10 years old. Not a problem. At some point, the germination rate starts to drop off. So just about 2 weeks ago, I tested some basil and I tested some Swiss chard just to make sure what the germination rate was. The previous year, I think the Swiss chard was 7 years old. Last year, I tested it. It was 90% germination rate, not too bad. This year, I tested it. It was down to about 50% germination rate. And I said, okay, that's enough. It's gone too low. I'm going to go out and buy fresh Swiss chard because we hadn't been able to produce any in the garden last year. And the way to do a germination test is you just take a small amount of seeds, put it on a paper towel, maybe in a small dish, wet the paper towel, and keep it moist for about a week. And then just count how many seeds germinated, how many didn't. And that'll give you a germination rate. If it gets much less than about 60, 70%, then it's probably time to go out and buy more seed. So that's an easy way to just test the viability of your seed. I do want to talk about seed planting that whole side of things, because we are now coming into planting season for a lot of stuff. There's a lot of different ways to do this. And I'll share my screen again real quick here. Through trial and error over a number of different years, what we finally settled in on here, the most kind of foolproof and efficient way for us to produce transplants is in seed trays like these and using Pro Mix. In particular, we use the one called BX, and we buy it in the large bales usually at Halifax Seed. And the reason being is that if you buy a potting mix, even if you just go to a local garden center, it's better to buy a potting mix probably than to try to use garden soil or even just compost out of your compost pile. I will describe why here in a little bit. You're going to get much more consistent results. The reason we use BX, and there's some other potting mixes that are similar, is it's got a small amount of starter fertilizer in there. So we'll put the potting mix into the seed trays, make sure it's tamped in firmly. You don't want to press it in too tight, but you don't want big air pockets at the same time because roots need to breathe. I think people don't really appreciate that. So if soil is compacted real tight, roots can't breathe, or if it's saturated with water too much all the time, they can't breathe either. So that's why a good potting mix is adjusted so that it's loose enough to provide that air mixture in there for the roots. There's a lot of different ways to do it. Some people use small pots instead of trays, different kinds of potting mix. You then probably need to fertilize, depending on how long they're going to be in there. You can use we use a fertilizer mix where the three numbers, the nitrogen, potassium, the nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium are all equal. We use a 20-20-20 mix, just like once a week, a small amount for as long as they're in those trays. And then once they get outside into the ground, we give them more organic based fertilizers. But because the way we've done it, we get a very consistent production of transplants, and it works quite well. A rule of thumb, how deep do you plant your seeds? Generally speaking, you plant the width of the seed, if that makes sense. So tiny little mustard seeds just barely go under the soil. A pea would go in about the depth that the pea is thick. So if a pea is like a 1/4 inch diameter, you would plant it a 1/4 inch deep. So there's a 1/4 inch of soil on top of the pea. Same with corn and beans and that sort of thing. So smaller seeds are planted closer to the surface. And some seeds are extremely fine, like rosemary, I can think of, maybe a few others, where you almost just sprinkle them on the surface and then just rub them lightly to get them to work into the soil. You can use things like a seeder for seeding. You know, if you've got a big seed tray and you're trying to get seeds in there, one of the things, if you're doing them by hand, you tend to overseed. You know, you have a big, like a forest coming up in each little pocket of the seed tray. And one way to avoid that, here's a simple little device I think you can buy at most any garden center. It's got a little plastic lid, and the lid has these tiny little openings, different sizes for different size seeds. There's big openings all the way down to small ones. And so you can put that, you put your seeds in here, you put the lid on, you adjust it so that it's the right size opening for the seeds that you're going to use. And then right at the base of the spout, there's 3 little ribs inside there that catch the seeds. So the seeds come out of the reservoir and they roll down the chute here and they get caught right on the end on those little ribs. And then basically you just start tapping and they fall off one at a time. And you can become, when you get good at this tapping business, you can get pretty precise at getting just the right amount of seeds you want in each little cell. And you can save a lot of seeds that way. And it also helps when you're thinning later, you don't have to thin out as many seeds. So that's one type of seeder that we really like to use. There's other types out there. And that's for seeding into seed trays. You could, I assume we haven't ever done it, but you could probably use it outdoors as well for direct seeding into the ground. So one thing I'd like to point out, I mentioned this is one of the biggest mistakes I've seen people make when they're working with seeds and seed packages. So here I've got a package of cabbage seed. Okay, I got my little number up there in the corner. This is from 2013. This is an 8-year-old cabbage seed. Okay. What I've seen a lot of people do, this is paper bag. Okay. Keep your seeds dry. I mentioned that. So a seed, its whole goal in life is to suck up water. Imbibition, it's called. So that embryo can break dormancy and start growing. It really, really wants to suck up water. So if I take this seed package, I'm working away, planting seeds, and I put it down on top of moist soil, this paper, the paper is going to start soaking up water from the soil, and I'm going to ruin all the seeds that I don't use inside this bag because the paper's wet. The seeds start absorbing that moisture that's in the paper. they're going to try to start breaking dormancy. So keep your seeds dry. Don't put paper bags down on top of moist soil when you're working with them. Just a word of caution there. So then seeds are going to germinate. We got them planted, everything looks good. You add a little water, water them in. And so now what's going to happen? They're going to imbibe. That's the first thing they're going to do. That's the first 24, 48 hours. They're going to soak up water. That's then the key signal for things to start happening. All the enzymes are going to start getting activated. It's going to start converting starch. The embryo is going to start waking up. So things are going to slowly start happening. Different crops take different lengths of time to germinate. Some of them have to sit there and think about it for a while. Probably the longest ones I can think of is parsley. It might take up to 2 weeks. Parsnips and carrots take a long time as well. Celery and a few other ones like that. Some of them are very quick, on the other hand, like your brassicas, your kale and your cabbage. Some of the plants in that family can come out of the ground pretty quickly within even 5, 6, 7 days. It all depends on temperature, germination rates, or how quickly germination is going to happen. And some plants really need it warm when they're going to be germinating. Probably the ones that need it the warmest are the peppers, particularly the hot peppers. So I think this weekend we're going to be starting some of the ultra hot peppers like the ghost peppers and habaneros and things like that. So we're going to be using a heating pad under the seed tray and a thermometer to try to keep the soil temperature at 28 or higher, even 30, maybe even in the low 30s, because those seeds are going to want to think they're in Arizona, basically. That's what it comes down to. So that's on one hand. On the other hand, a lot of seeds, the cold hardy ones, room temperature is fine for germination. And usually it will say on the package, or you can do a little bit of homework specifically for what it is that you're germinating on, what is an optimal temperature for germination. So the other thing then is light. When plants start to grow, come out of the soil, again, that's when they're converting from using their stored food into the first photosynthesis. So they're most fragile at that time, right when plants come out of the soil, that they're weaning themselves off their stored food, and they really need that sunlight to get that photosynthesis kicked in and start to have some healthy growth. So one of the things that probably, to be honest with you, makes me the saddest is to see plants that have come out of the soil in low light. And I'll show you some pictures here. This is example of a number of different kinds here. But you can see, particularly on the left, all of these seedlings have gotten very tall, very thin, very spindly, and they're leaning towards the light. On the right, you can see the same type of plant. The ones on the left were grown in high light conditions. The ones on the right were grown in low light conditions. So this is generally called legginess. The botanical term is etiolation. And the problem with plants that grow this way is they're going to be weak for the rest of their lives. Here's another example. These are probably tomato seedlings that were started in a window. And look how long and leggy they are. So you've got that long stem that the plant has to deal with for the rest of its life. It's going to cause a lot of weakness for that plant. So the issue then is, how do you avoid that legginess right when those plants germinate? And the only real solution is you've got to have high light. And directional light, like a window, is not that good either. So the best way around it is using grow lights. Everybody knows what grow lights are. A lot of places sell them, a lot of different kinds, different prices. But this is what I would recommend is if you don't already have a good set of grow lights, go out and buy some grow lights. I think of it as infrastructure. And anytime you're spending money on garden infrastructure, it's going to pay for itself very quickly because you're going to be able to produce plants more quickly, more easily, more efficiently, higher quality. You're going to get better harvests at the end of the day. So think about spending that money. It's probably some of the best spent money you'll ever spend, particularly when you think about the price of vegetables these days. The other thing then with a grow light is with your plants, you want to get that light as close to the plant as possible, like the bottom part of the photo there, where they're basically just an inch or so or even less above the plant. And you'll know that you've got a bright enough grow light when you see really short, compact plants. So this is another example of, these are my hot peppers from last year. This is probably now in March sometime. I've got LED lights pretty much right on top of the leaves. So I'm trying to max out that light intensity onto the leaves. I'm trying to max out that photosynthesis in the leaves. They're sitting on a heat pad as well. So they're very happy. They're growing very well. An interesting side note about LED lights, it really revolutionized indoor growing. That's why you now have most marijuana grow ops are using LED lights. You've got indoor growing operations for lettuce, for all kinds of vegetables produced indoors because it's low energy, low electrical demand, low heat output LED lights, and they can also fine tune the spectrum. So it's curious that the reason plants look green is that's the only part of the spectrum they don't use. So green is reflected back off the leaf. It's not absorbed. What they do absorb is the reds and the blues primarily. So when you look at these LED grow lights, you can buy some that is just red and blue. And you grow plants under those and they look gray because they're not reflecting back any spectrum of light. They're absorbing everything, all the red and all the blue light coming off the LEDs. So they've been able to fine tune things that way. So at the end of the day, you want to see very short, stubby plants, ideally, if they're getting full sunlight, those early seedlings. So this are several trays. They're in a greenhouse. So all those cotyledons have come up. And if you look closely, you can just barely see the first tiny bit of seed leaves coming out of some of them. I mean, the true leaves, excuse me. So that's an indication where there's good highlight. They're short and stubby. They haven't stretched out, and they're going to be as healthy as possible going into later life. The other thing I want to mention, the other big problem with early germinating plants, aside from legginess or etiolation, is if you're using a potting mix that you may have taken from outside, from your compost pile, from your soil, other sources like that, you may be bringing in a particular type of fungus that causes what's called damping off on these early fragile germinants. So this is an example of damping off fungi. What it does is it attacks the root system and the collar right at the point where the plant goes into the ground. And you usually don't even know you have a problem until it's too late. And you go out there one day and suddenly all your little seedlings have fallen over and they've succumbed to the damping off fungi called botrytis. It's very common in soil. And when you're growing seedlings under low light, usually in cooler temperatures, and there's botrytis in the soil, you're running the risk of damping off. One year I lost an entire tomato crop that way because of the soil mix that we were using. And we had a succession of probably 7, 8 cloudy days, and we just didn't really get any heat. So we started to run into some damping off problem. So that's the other thing to keep track of. Just a few more photos here on ways to grow out early germinants. This is one of our greenhouses. You can see a whole lot of those seed trays there. There's a number of different things. We've got some dormant fig trees on the right that are going to be leafing out. But they're getting effectively full sunlight. And that's the beauty of a greenhouse, like a grow light, is it's non-directional light. They're not going to be leaning out towards just one window. So they're getting light pretty much from all directions. So it's going to prevent legginess. And then if you look way at the far end there, you see this blue foam insulation. And what that is it's a box, 2-inch foam, just screwed together. Nothing fancy. And in the bottom of the box is a seedling heat mat. You can buy these in different sizes. This is the bigger one. And it comes with a thermostat. So there's a little temperature probe. This fine cord you can see coming down at the end has a little probe on it that you stick into the soil. It monitors the soil temperature and it'll turn on and off the heating pad to keep the temperature just right. So what we do is we put seed trays in there, we put the probe in, it tells us what the temperature of the soil is so that we're getting optimal germination. We've got good sunlight at the same time because it's effectively like a mini heated greenhouse inside of an unheated greenhouse. And then at nighttime, we put bubble wrap over the whole thing to keep the heat in. Works beautifully. So that's another possibility to create kind of like a mini heated greenhouse. If you've got a situation where you've got good light, but you might not be able to heat it optimally. So then what we do is, so we're growing out a lot of different things, and different things need to get seeded at different times in the spring. They need to get transplanted out at different times, depending on what it is. And I don't really have a good way to walk through planting schedules, when you plant things, when they're ready to be transplanted out, that sort of thing. What I did in the chat box, if you go right to the very top, you'll find 2 links there. This is just one that I found. There's probably scores of them out there, dozens can be easily found, of seeding schedules. So the second link there is from Halifax Seed. Pretty nice layout for when to seed into trays, indoor, when to do indoor seeding, when to transplant those out, when to do direct seeding for a whole lot of different crops. So there's a lot of different sources like that. So depending on what it is you want to grow, you can go to schedules like this and figure out when to start seeding. It's going to depend on your grow light setup, when you're going to be able to transplant it out, what kind of a protected environment you might have when you do transplant it out. And the other thing I want to mention about seeding, we tend to think that we only seed once in the spring for things. And then that's it, you plant them and that's your garden, and then you harvest in the fall and you're done. But what we do is, depending on what it is, we do a lot of successional seeding. So for example, radishes. I think of radish as a 6-week crop. They're in and out in 6 weeks. Otherwise, if you wait much longer, they start to get too spicy. They're going to start to go to seed, that sort of thing. So what we do is in different parts of the garden, every 2 weeks, we just plant a few rows of radishes. So that way we are always harvesting some radishes somewhere. You see what I mean? There's other things that go pretty quick, like arugula, cilantro, a few of the other herbs like that, that are also fairly short season crops. So we'll do successional planting. Some beds will get 3 crops out of one bed. So there'll be an early spring crop, like maybe radish or arugula, that gets planted even as early as, say, early April or mid-April. That'll get harvested by the end of May or early May. Then we'll put in a summer crop there. And then that'll get pulled out like by the end of, let's say, September. And then we'll put in a fall crop in there as well. So you can really start to work your gardens with successional planting and thinking about timing of different crops that way. And you can get a huge amount out of each square foot if you really plan it well. But also keep in mind you're pushing your soil, so you're going to need to regenerate your soil if you're doing a lot of successional planting by adding more compost and so on each time you replant. But that's those kind of seeding schedules are really good idea to have. And I mentioned we're going to start seeding this weekend indoors. We're going to be doing our peppers, probably onion. We do the red onion and a yellow storage onion and leeks. Give those a head start, and they're going to be ready to transplant out probably in May sometime. In another 2 weeks, in early March, we'll probably start seeding the next round of things, which might be the tomatoes, and maybe some of the early lettuces, cold hardy lettuces, kale, Swiss chard, some things like that. Again, in the seed trays, finish them in a greenhouse, and then those will be going out in late April, early May as well. Tomatoes, of course, are going to stay in the greenhouse as long as possible, upgrading them into bigger pots, and they'll finally get put out into greenhouses probably in early June, something like that. So, you know, every year, we've been doing this for, 30 years, probably 25, 30 years. And every year it gets a little better, a little more efficient. Keep notes, write down dates, keep a good seed library. And every year you get a little bit better at it, a little less loss, that sort of thing. And it just really pays off to keep notes, stay organized, be meticulous. Every year is a little bit different. It's always a surprise. So one year we had, went out into the greenhouse one day, all these tiny little seedlings, you know, and on one tray, half of them were gone, just like gone. Like what? It looked really close, and there's tiny little stub sticking out where there was seedlings. And we realized we had a mouse coming in and basically just munching away. So we had to put in one of those little live traps, and we caught ourselves a mouse. You know, all you do is add a little peanut butter, of course, and that's way better than a seedling. Caught ourselves a mouse and took it for a drive and got rid of it. But there's always something like that that you really have to keep an eye out for. Somebody else told me that their cat got into a tray under a grow light one time, made a heck of a mess. So there's always something. Then it comes down to transplanting out. That's a whole nother topic in itself, really, but I'll touch into it just a little bit here. I'll share my screen again. I think the basic rule of thumb is the more protection you can give transplants, when you put them out in the garden, the better, depending on what it is. I mean, this is things that are transplanted and not direct seeded. That's why cold frames are nice to give that early boost of heat. This is a tunnel, a poly tunnel that we built last spring. It uses 3/4 inch, I believe it's 1/2 inch PVC electrical conduit that bends just nicely like that into hoops. And that's stuck onto rebar on each end. I think 18-inch pieces of rebar hammered into the soil. And you can put the conduit right over the end of the rebar, gives you some nice set of hoops there. And then some, this is just vapor barrier, 6 mil from the hardware store. Stretch it over the whole thing. Keep the sides up a little bit for ventilation. And now you've got a really nice protected, warm environment. And we put a lot of tomato plants in there and got a huge harvest out of it, because what this does is that early growth, when you first transplant things out, if it's optimal, if it's warm, the more growth you get early on, the more harvest you're going to get at the end of the season. That's particularly true with peppers, tomatoes, eggplants, all of the heat-loving stuff, cucumbers, even zucchini and so on. Give them that extra boost of heat early on, and it's going to pay off enormously at the end of the growing season. So I think maybe what I'd like to do is pause here before I get into sprouts and microgreens, and questions, Q&A. And I covered a lot of ground there, some of it fairly quickly. We could go deep into some of it if people want. And don't hesitate to come off mute if you've got a question.
Bob, you're there.
Okay, I think I know what happened, and I will add them again. Thank you, David.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, there's one of them.
Hi, Bob. It's Christine.
Hi, Christine.
Hi. I've got these cedar boxes that I've made that are like kind of like small seeding boxes. And I'm wondering if I should just abandon them, because I think I have a lot of what you were saying about the roots not working with the cold and the, what did you call that?
Damping off.
Damping off. I mean, it could be that I've got them too cold too, but I'm just wondering if the boxes themselves might be the problem.
Are they indoors or just like a raised bed, or what is it?
They're just like, thin cedar boxes. They're shallow boxes. They're
Okay, so you're starting plants indoors then in the box?
yeah.
What are you using for a potting mix for the soil?
Well, that's the other thing. I think I'm gonna have to just start all over again.
You're probably got the fungus in the soil if it's garden soil.
Okay.
Pretty ubiquitous. It's pretty much in every soil, but usually it's not a problem with plants. So that's probably going on. And if you switch to a potting mix, you wouldn't have the problem. The other thing you could do is pasteurize the soil in an oven for a while. I don't know too many people that do that. Or just try to keep it really warm and try to outgrow any botrytis infection.
Okay, then the second question I had was, I've got, those warming things that you wrap around a carboy to keep it a constant temperature. Would that work if I put it like underneath a box? Would that be like a little seed mat for warming it? Or it's not as even?
Yeah, no, you're right. It wouldn't be as even. It would heat part of it, but I don't know if you'd get uniform heating with those. It's more like a rope. Is that when you wrap around a carboy?
Yeah, it's just a thin strip.
Yeah.
Okay.
But honestly, infrastructure. Spend the money, you've got it year after year. It's going to work well, going to, give you the best results. I've even seen people use like heating pads, the medical heating pads, the electrical ones. But they do have ones different sizes specifically for growing. Okay, Jill's asking soil recommendation for container gardening. Yes, that's always good to do. Container gardening, on the patio, backyard, even a balcony of an apartment. Get as many containers going as you can. So these, I assume, you'd be transplanting things in there or maybe direct seeding things in there. We do a lot of container garden, and we do a mix of good, well composted compost, garden soil, and potting mix or peat moss, like 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 in a container for growing. The peat moss or the potting mix helps to kind of aerate the pot to make sure you're getting enough root aeration in there. John McKay had a question about winter sowing in water containers. Is it ideal in our condition in water containers? John, I don't quite know what you mean by a water container. So I don't quite know how to answer your question there. And John, you've also asked, have you ever used an instant pot for germinating seeds? No, I haven't. I'm not quite sure what an instant pot is. I know that there's some things where it's kind of smushed down and you add water and it expands up. But I don't really have any experience with that. Yeah, and David, I'm sure you want to think you're in Arizona sometimes as well. Yeah. Okay.
Eating your peppers helps for me to think I'm in Arizona.
Hey, thank you, John. The ones you buy water in, okay? That could work, except you're going to need drainage. You always need drainage in any container at all. Any container, you're going to need drainage. You don't want water standing in the bottom or building up, because again, it's going to prevent aeration of the roots. So if you poke holes in containers, that should work. And winter sowing, again, it's going to depend on what you want to do with the plants. I'm going to show you some microgreens here in a bit. That's definitely winter sowing. It just depends on what you're going to do, when they're going to get transplanted out, and so on. Janice just asked, when do you start fertilizing the seedlings? Very good question. So we wait until they're up out of the ground. And usually we wait until we start to see the first true leaf. That's when we start fertilizing. So it's a light fertilizing once a week, only while they're in the seed trays. And then
We have to fertilize while they're in the seed trays too. Oops, sorry.
While they're in the seed trays, once a week. And then we put them, once they're out in the garden, The soil fertility itself usually takes care of it because we add a lot of compost and other natural amendments into the soil, and they usually can hit the ground running. We've had lettuce seedlings that are so robust, like almost a miniature head of lettuce almost in the seed tray, put it in the garden, or particularly in a cold frame, and we're picking lettuce within 2 weeks because they can hit the ground that quickly if you've got really good, robust transplants. So another question, when to start planting in an unheated greenhouse, a dome? And Christine, I know you've got a nice dome there. I haven't seen it yet. I don't think you've got electricity in that. If you did, you could do one of those boxes with the heating pad that give you an even earlier start. But an unheated greenhouse, it really then comes down to what is the coldest nighttime low that you're going to have to worry about. Okay, so it can get below freezing and your plants are going to be okay. Maybe 3, 4, 5 below because the frost won't get inside the greenhouse, maybe a little bit around the edges because it'll have retained enough heat in the days. But if it's going to get down to 8, 10 below or lower, then you're probably going to kill things. So you're limited by your nighttime lows, and then trying to gauge coming into spring, when are you going to move past those really cold nights? So there's a difference in my mind between what is a frost and what is a freeze. You know, and it's getting that down below about, once you're past about 3, 4 below, you're getting into freeze territory, which can work its way into an unheated greenhouse. And I remember one year, people might remember back in June, there was a really hard frost, early June, and we had an unheated greenhouse. We had put peppers and tomatoes in it, and we lost a lot of the plants that were right around the outside of that greenhouse because it was cold enough that it worked its way inside. I have in unheated, this is the other thing you can do, Christine, is get yourself row cover, which is like a spun polyester fabric, different weights. Get a thicker one. Most garden centers sell them. And this will give you a little more protection if you're putting plants out in a greenhouse. And if it looks like it's going to be a really cold night, and I've done this myself, you just cover all the trays with row cover, particularly around the outside edges. And there's enough warmth in the soil that it'll radiate out under the grow cover and keep things warm. So you can get pretty cold at night that way and still protect things.
Thanks.
Petra wants to know, what do you use for fertilizing seed trays? I like to use a good even mix of the 3 numbers. We use a 20-20-20 to actually, the product, the brand name is Plant Products. As we grow a lot of stuff, we buy big bags of it. And again, that's really just for potted plants.
Thanks, Bob. I have another question, though, further up on the list, and it's about, I have a Lee Valley seed starter kit with grow lights, and I put arugula in one tray, and it was up within a few days, and it's inches. I've been eating it ever since for a month. But the lettuce took about 2 weeks to germinate, and I cannot get it to go past 2 little red cotyledons just sitting there, not bolted, but they won't do nothing.
Huh.
Yeah. Well, next.
My very first thought is try a different type of lettuce.
Okay.
Might have bad seed.
Might be.
So that's what I noticed. If we scroll back to when I was talking about the life of seeds,
Mhm.
the seeds get older and the germination rate goes down. Even though there's still some seeds germinating, it tends to be a weaker germination, and the plants aren't as vigorous coming out of really old seed. So even though I'm still maybe getting 50% germination, it's not going to be as high a quality of germination just because they're old and maybe the embryo is slightly damaged. I don't know, whatever it might be. Well, that would be my first thought, is try a different variety of fresh seed.
Okay,
Really shouldn't cause too much trouble.
I'll try different varieties. Very frustrating because they just sit there, you know, they look quite healthy, but they do nothing. Anyway, thanks a lot.
Okay, Janice wants to know, maybe that's the last question before I get into sprouts, and we can come back to this again as at the end. But Janice wants to know, is the drying product in your seed library like silica that comes with electronic packaging? Yes, it is. That's basically what it is. It's silica gel. I buy it from Lee Valley. And it comes in like a metal container, and then I just put it in paper envelopes. And the nice thing about that type of silica gel is it's rechargeable. So it changes a color. I think it starts out pink when it's charged up. And then when it's sucked up about as much moisture as it's gonna suck up, it changes from pink to white. I put it in the oven, dry it out, it becomes pink again, and then I reuse it. So every winter is when I recharge my silica gel and put it back into those seed bags. Okay, tell you what, let me move on and get into sprouts and microgreens. And just see where I'm at here with everything. Okay. Let me first talk about sprouts. People are probably relatively familiar with doing sprouts. They're dead easy. You know, I just finished a jar right here. This is alfalfa sprouts, probably one of the most common. This jar is maybe, I think I started this about 6 days ago, maybe 7 days ago. Really nice looking sprouts. Put them on sandwiches, salads, all kinds of uses. And, you know, I could get into a whole thing about nutrition. Because over time, and maybe just to diverge here for a second, what I've become aware of over the past 10, 20 years is plant breeders. They've bred just about every vegetable you can think of, and they bred it for shelf life and appearance. Okay. The last thing they've bred for is nutrition content. They don't care about nutrition content. All they want is shelf life and appearance. So when you go to the grocery store, really nice looking vegetables, they're going to keep a long time and stay on that shelf, but the nutrition content is much, much lower than when you're growing things by yourself in the garden. And the flavor is a lot less. I mean, you know, people probably, some of you already have experience between homegrown celery, store-bought celery, tomatoes. You know, a store-bought tomato will just never compare, you know, particularly in wintertime. But it's the nutrition level that's in there. It's all the phytochemicals, it's all the vitamins, all the minerals. Countless studies have documented, in some cases, you got 40, 50, even 60% less nutritive content in a commercial vegetable than you would with a homegrown vegetable. So the same is true with sprouts. When you germinate those seeds, all those enzymes have kicked in, and now you've got a huge variety of phytochemicals that are perfect for your health. So particularly in the wintertime, this is one way to really optimize your diet and get all the right phytonutrients in there. So sprouts are really easy. They got even easier with things like this. You can buy a number of different types. This is one that we use. You can buy them at most garden centers or even like Canadian Tire, places like that. It's just a screen lid, got little legs on it. You screw your jar on there, soak your seeds, and then you can turn it upside down, let them drain. And great way to grow your sprouts. So where to get sprout seeds? Same with microgreens. Everybody's might be familiar with this brand, Mums. And you go into a garden center, a lot of other places you'll see Mums. And talk about a going concern. It's the Mum family in Saskatchewan. They started doing this a way long time ago, and they really struck a nerve big time. And they just keep getting better and better. It's quite amazing. Let me share my screen here. So I was talking about buying seeds in bulk. It's the same thing with buying sprouts or microgreen seeds. You could go to the garden center and buy a little bag, and it's going to cost the most. Or you can go to sprouting.com and look around there, and they've got dozens and dozens, pretty much everything you can think of, and it's all organic. And the quantity, so here's alfalfa. I went to this page. Okay, I could buy a 125 gram bag. Okay, and there's going to be one price. This is the 250 gram bag, or I could go up to 25 kilograms, you know, throw it over my shoulder. I could have a huge bag of alfalfa. It's not that I'd ever use that many. My point is that it gets, if you start to buy volume and you know you can store them for 3, 4, 5, 6 years in a refrigerator, it gets really cheap to buy sprouting seeds. If you go direct and buy them that way, they even sell kits for businesses to set up and sell sprouts like at farmers markets and that sort of thing. So here is a big bag. This is now 1 kilogram bag. I've used a lot of it. This is broccoli brassica blend. So been making a lot of broccoli sprouts.
We only see the, we can't see you, Bob.
I forgot to turn it off. So this is a 1 kilogram bag. I've already used a lot of it of broccoli brassica mix from Mums that I bought directly. I think this was a year ago, 2 years ago. And I'm still using it quite nicely because I keep it in the fridge. So we make a lot of broccoli sprouts. This is the 1/4 kilogram, 250 gram bag. I think the stores sell locally here, maybe 125 gram or even less for a pretty high price. So that's just a something to keep in mind. And I'll share my screen one last time here. Yeah, here we are. So I'll walk you through how to grow microgreens. You're going to need a grow light, ideally, to avoid that legginess, the etiolation. This is a microgreen salad mix, and get an enormous number of great salad fixins on there. There's a close-up. So this is peas, fenugreek, sunflowers, and I think there's one other thing in there. I don't quite remember, but a great salad mix for the middle of the winter that you're able to grow yourself. So I've got one right here. There is a microgreen tray. So we've already started mowing down half of it, and we're going to be having more salads with the other half. This tray is probably 2 weeks old. And it's going to give us a heck of a lot of salad greens, sandwich fixins, all kinds of stuff. So it started on a cafeteria tray. Okay, so you have to figure out where you can get yourself some cafeteria trays. Nice thing about them, cafeteria tray, is they're just the right depth, like about a half an inch deep there with the lip that comes up. It's about a half an inch of depth. So it's a nice tray, shallow, just the amount of soil that you're going to need to put in there. We've drilled holes in the bottom uniformly so that we get some drainage. And then what we do is we take the potting mix, pack it on there just to that height of the tray. And then we take that microgreen seed mix and sprinkle it all over the potting mix on the top and wet the whole thing down so the seeds can imbibe. That's when they're going to start growing. Then what we do is we take a second tray, we put it on top with some heavy weights. In our case, we just use a couple of pieces of firewood, hold that tray down on top of the seeds that are on top of the soil until they germinate. And the roots then are pushed down into the soil. So the roots come out first, they go down into the soil, get their feet in there. Then we take the top tray off, and then all of those cotyledons start to come up and stretch. So it's under a grow light, everything starts growing. And I think we fertilize it once. That's about all we need to get these microgreens. So pretty easy to do, but you need some kind of a container like this, and you need a good light. And it's really just a sprout gone to the next stage. So with a sprout, you're eating the entire plant. You're eating the roots and everything, but it's still at the early stage. With a microgreen, you're eating now just the top, but it's still kind of at a young seedling stage. So there's a pea sprout right there, for example. So that's good eating. And the same with sunflower sprouts, fenugreek. So they're just starting to put out, depending on what it is, their first true leaves as microgreens. And then what we're going to do is this whole thing, if I do this without making a mess, this whole thing will lift up out of the tray as a mat of roots. Grab onto it close here, see if I can pull it up enough, keep it off my computer. But there's a whole mat of roots here that they grew from. So that whole thing goes in the compost pile when we're done. So all we did was just with scissors, mow down the microgreens, put them in the salad, and off we go. So that's most of what I have on sprouts and microgreens. And the best way to buy seeds, the most economical way to buy seeds anyway. You know, when I first went to Mums, it was in, when was it? January of 2020. Could buy anything I wanted, no problem. I went back to them in April of 2020. That's when COVID was coming on strong. And everything was sold out or backlogged, back ordered, that kind of thing, just because of the demand. And I know that every year, more and more people are getting serious about gardening, buying grow lights, getting there's more and more greenhouses getting put up across the province. So people are starting to get more serious again about putting in infrastructure, even small greenhouses at home. I was just at Halifax Seed. They had a 4 by 6 foot one that was on sale. So it's really starting to take off. People beginning to realize that it's really kind of a basic life skill, being able to grow stuff. And I think it's going to become more and more important. Nancy's got a very good question, which I should have mentioned. How long do you leave your grow lights on for? You have to give them a dark period, because the way the kind of the 24-hour cycle of a plant is it's going to spend most of its time photosynthesizing. And then just like us, it needs a rest period. It's called respiration, where it then is kind of regrouping, almost moving everything around and getting ready for the next day. So what we do is we make it a long day, like if it was the peak of summer, 16 hours. So we have timers on the grow lights. You set it for 16 hours. So, you know, it kicks on at like, I don't know, 6 in the morning, turns off at 10 at night, something like that. And that seems to be optimal. So they're getting the most amount of photosynthetic time during the day, and then they still get that downtime at night. And even I think the commercial growers, one of the biggest ones, if you're driving down the valley, just past Berwick, before you get to Middleton, you look over on the left side and you'll drive past the Denhan greenhouses, which when they get that big, they're not called greenhouses anymore. It's called a range. I think he's got now 5 acres under glass, and it's all tomatoes and cucumbers mostly. And they start transplanting and growing tomatoes in December, and it's all heated. And they've now got LED lights in to extend the day length in the wintertime, because, you know, we've got the shortest days in the wintertime. But you can drive down there right at around 8 in the evening, and the whole thing will be lit up with LED lights because they're giving them basically full day length. So I'm just looking at any other questions here. Don't hesitate to jump in. Yeah, I can never say enough about kind of the nutrition side of things and why it's important to grow as much of your own food as possible, just from the point of view of improved nutrition, because you're getting vegetables as fresh as possible. You know who grew it, you know what went into it, you know what got put on it. So you feel more comfortable. A lot of times when things come out of our garden, we don't even bother to wash it, because, you know, there's nothing to wash off. And maybe, or, you know, there's maybe rain or something, but it's all organic. And so we're not worried about any kind of contamination or anything like that. Tansy asks, will tomatoes taste as good if you extend their daylight hours growing season? It's a good question. I mean, you know, you're already ahead of the curve compared to a store-bought tomato. So they're always going to taste better anyway. And I've never really been able to tell the difference. Well, tomatoes, we don't give them artificial light, and only in the beginning when they're under grow lights as seedlings. And you really can't tell the effect of that by the time you have a mature plant and a tomato and a ripe tomato. Yeah, I think with store-bought tomatoes, if you follow how they're produced, a lot of them are picked when they're green, and then they're ripened artificially with ethylene gas. So they're basically gassed. They turn red, but they're not really ripe, but they turn red and they kind of look ripe. So particularly now, if you go and buy a tomato in the grocery store, it looks ripe, but it's not, is what it comes down to, because it was artificially ripened. Here's a story for you. I was always trying to have a vine ripened tomato by my wife's birthday. No, excuse me, our anniversary, June 17th. That's not easy. Vine ripened tomato by June 17th. Okay. So one year it was close. The tomato was like full size, still green. You could see it was thinking about turning red, and I only had like 2-3 days left. So what I did was, knowing that they gas tomatoes, okay, and with ethylene gas, one of the best sources of ethylene gas is apples. Okay, so I took 2 or 3 apples, I dropped them on the ground and bruised them really well, so they produce a lot of gas, ethylene, put them in a plastic bag, tied the bag around that tomato, and bingo, within 2 days, I had a red tomato. So I was cheating, but I did it. So that's commercially how they do it. Just a little side story there. So somebody's asking, Courtney, any recommendations on buying straw, or are there any groups buying bulk orders of straw in this area? Really good question. Problem with straw is it's usually only available in the fall, like from August onward, because that's when they cut and make straw. If there's still some available, it might be hard to find. I know the Red Barn usually carries straw. I don't know if Dan still has some down there or not. You'd really have to just call around. To buy it in bulk usually means probably bringing it in from somewhere, the valley or somewhere else, by truck. Probably the best thing to do there would be to call some of the horse stables in the area, because they go through a bit of straw, and ask them when they're buying, and if you could tag on to one of their orders. That would be my guess. Myself, here, we just usually only go through maybe 3 or 4 bales each year for mulching, like you saw the tomatoes, for garlic mulching. So we just buy it locally when we can, but usually in the fall. Yeah, Carol, I know it's awful hard to get straw. Yeah, I don't know what to tell you. And you probably know the difference between straw and hay. You definitely want to avoid hay in the garden. Even straw can be a problem sometimes, but hay will have a lot of seeds in it. And those seeds will fall out into your soil, they'll start growing, and you're going to get a whole lot of weeds. Even with straw can have seeds in it. And what I do is I buy straw a month or 6 weeks before we're going to use it. I leave it outside in the rain, let it get wet. If it's not raining, I'll even hose it down, get all those seeds to germinate when they're still in the bale. And then that way they'll kind of germinate and die off. And then I've got seed-free straw. So you basically force germination on any seeds that are in there. So that's a nice trick to keep in mind. So yeah, I always want to encourage seed saving. I'm giving you some ideas, but it's nice to experiment with. And actually, bees love it as well. If you're interested in keeping our pollinators happy, always let a few things go to seed. Even just one plant out of a crop of something that you've got. Let them flower. Watch how they produce ripe seed. We did that one year with parsley. Again, one plant, and we had enough parsley seed for the next 10 years. You just watch it, look at it every week. You can see the seed heads ripening, the seeds starting to mature. They look like they're starting to dry out, maybe fall off. That's a time to start, pull the whole thing and harvest it. Dill is super easy to do as well, to harvest dill seed, arugula. There's a lot of them. So just let them go to seed and keep an eye, watch what they're doing. Last year we grew a lot of sage, and I've got so much sage seed now, I don't know what to do with it all. I do have just two more pictures here that I want to talk about. So I'm going to go back to my screen again. Yeah, here we are. So I couldn't resist but putting this up. This, I hit the brakes when I saw this sign driving down the Bedford Highway about 10 years ago. The Bedford Historical Society put this sign up. And it really talks about, it was talking about the increased interest in gardening, greenhouses, that sort of thing. In effect, we're coming full circle because this is what people did. Pretty much everybody had a garden. You know, you had your potato patch, you grew your cabbages, you had a whole bunch of other things. There's still a lot of parts of the Maritimes and Atlantic Canada where it's still baked into the culture. You know, kids have learned from their grandparents and that sort of thing. I want to put this up. Also, I'm hoping everybody knows where the Crossroads Educational Vegetable Garden is. If you're familiar with St. Margaret's Bay, it's right at the crossroads where the one road heads down to Peggy's Cove, the other road goes to Hubbard's, and the other one goes from the off to the highway. So that's the crossroads. There's the St. Margaret's Bay Garden Club has a big ornamental set of gardens right at the intersection. And right next to that is where we have the educational vegetable garden. It's all volunteer run. We're going to be coming into our 11th year this spring. Every year we grow somewhere around 500 pounds of vegetables. It all goes to the food bank. They absolutely love us for it. Fresh vegetables for folks. And last year, I think it was the year before, we put up a seed library. So not sure exactly when we're going to install it this year. It'll probably be late March, early April. We'll see if we can get a posting in the Masthead News. But you know, I've been showing you all these big bags of homegrown seed. Let me take my screen off here. Showing you all these big bags of homegrown seed. This is cilantro. You know, this is just like 10% of what we grew from a few cilantro plants. We got the parsnip I mentioned. There's sage, a whole lot of things. And all of that's going to go into the food bank. We've got volunteers, a bunch of kids that will take seeds and put them in small envelopes and label them. And so it's all free for people to take from the seed library. And if people are able to donate seeds, there's a box inside of there as well where they can leave a donation. And so obviously with the donation, we want to know not just if it's beets, but what kind of beets, you know, what's the variety and what year did you grow the seeds? How old are they? And then that way we can give people a little bit more information when they come and take seeds out of the seed library. So it's kind of a community swapping point there. And worked really well. Past couple of years, we've had hundreds of people poke in there and see what they can use. So don't hesitate to jump in. I'm just looking at some of the other questions here. as we've gone through a lot of different. um, And I wish I could spend more time on seed saving and how best to do that. Because there's heirloom seeds, and they're heirloom for a reason. It's because somebody's always saved seeds at the end of the year, and they stay true to type. They don't cross-pollinate with other things. And so you're able to keep a lineage of seed going, as opposed to, say, a hybrid, where every year they have to cross-pollinate very specifically to get something. Hybrid seeds tend to be more vigorous for a particular trait, but they're not something that you can save the seeds and you'll get the same type of plant back every year. So there's a lot of different ways. And as seed costs go up, we could easily here spend quite a few $100s just on seeds. And I'm amazed at, you buy one of these, depending on the seed, type of seed, you buy some of these, I'm pull out a few here kind of randomly out of my box, what I can find. Yeah, here's celery, for example. Okay, this is got 21 written on it. So I bought this last year, or this one might have been given to me. No, I think we bought it. And, I'm sitting there in the store picking up these seed pouches. This one only costs $3, not too bad. Okay, I run my finger along the bottom of the package. You've probably all done this. Okay, and you can kind of feel how many seeds are in there, before you buy it. And it gets amazing. Some of the stuff, like the hybrid tomatoes or the peppers, you can hardly feel anything down there. And it might be $6, $7 for the little bag. And you're like, what's going on? So if you haven't noticed, if you want to do well in life, start a seed company. They are all doing really, really well. And you can start to see why, because, on the one hand, one plant will give you way more than this, and you divvy it up into tiny bags like this and sell it for $3, $4 each. And you can see why they're doing so well. So it's, again, another reason to save seed. It's not that difficult. One year we saved seed, still using a lot of it from, I think, 7 different varieties of tomatoes. So that means we had to save some tomatoes. We had to scoop out the seeds out of each tomato. We had to put them in separate little cups with labels. So you don't want to, that's the biggest problem with saving seed, is getting labels mixed up of what's what. And with tomatoes in particular, you let them sit on the counter in that kind of jelly mush that they come in, and from the tomato, and you let it ferment for about 3 days. And it's going to actually improve the germination rate of the seeds. And then you put them in a sieve, you wash out all of that, jelly stuff. So you just have the seeds, and then you dry them on paper towels, make sure they're good and dry, and you've got seeds. And those will last if properly stored. Like I told you, tomato seeds can last, up to 10 years sometimes. Carol, thank you for your comment there. It looks like you're taking notes. Yeah, don't hesitate to ask any questions. I've heard of Seeds of Diversity. I know it's very important saving heirlooms. I know that's probably one of their main goals. Yeah, clay soils. I've talked with a lot of people, even some of the farmers out towards the Windsor area. where they have a lot of problems with clay soils, just because of the poor drainage. Right around St. Margaret's Bay, we have almost the opposite problem. It tends to be sandy soils because we're on a glacial till, I think. So clay soils can be really tricky, just getting good drainage. And the best really way to handle it is try to concentrate on getting as much organic matter into the soil as possible. So it'd be just continually adding manure, compost, any kind of organic matter you can into there year after year to loosen up the soil, and really trying to focus on sort of concentrated beds areas and improve the soil. Here with the sandy soils, it's really taken us constantly adding horse manure and compost. It takes us about even just 4 years or more to get soil to the point where it's really good. And we've got organic matter now pushing 15% in the soils, which is pretty high. By contrast, the average agricultural field, like out in the valley, might be down around 1%, maybe 2% if they're lucky. And by building that organic matter content, you're building the ecosystem, when you think of it that way, because you're going to get a huge range of microorganisms coming into the soil and thriving. And the better the kind of the soil ecosystem, the healthier the plant's going to be, because there's all kinds of reciprocity that takes place there. So I do want to, maybe since I've got a little bit of time, I want to jump back to Transition Bay, because, you know, we do this kind of stuff. We have done all kinds of workshops in the past. So this is probably the 3rd or 4th time we've done a seed germination workshop. We've done greenhouse workshops, all kinds of food preservation workshops, fermenting, you name the subject. And this is why we're, with the help of more volunteers, we're always able to put on more and more things. So a couple of things for your calendar. March 24th, Malagash mushroom. Trying to remember the name of the guy. It's not coming to me right now, but he is going to give a workshop on cultivating mushrooms. I think he's got an operation where he's actually producing the spawn, the plugs of different kinds of mushrooms. How do you get them into wood or other types of media and produce mushrooms for your own use? I don't know that he's going to get much into wild crafting mushrooms. That can be tricky business unless you're with somebody out there and know exactly where to start on the kind of the easy stuff. But he will be talking about cultivating mushrooms. Then on April 14th, we have our local celebrity chef, straight in from Las Vegas, David Wimberly, who will be doing a cooking show with dandelion cuisine. It's going to be the height of dandelion season, we think. Those fresh young leaves are going to be coming out, maybe some of the first flowers. And so, David, I understand you're going to have a nice lineup of different kinds of dandelion recipes for us. And you know, historically, dandelions came to North America as a food crop. I don't know if people realize that. And look what happened.
They also came here as the main medicinal herb in Europe. They were the most common and most valued herb in the herbalist repertoire. So they're one of the very first plants that Europeans brought over here. They like it here.
They certainly do. Mhm. And no- yeah. Yeah. Okay, we've got some time. Any last questions? Anything about gardening? Not just seeding necessarily, that I can help you with. Be very glad to do that. Because we grow a lot of different things. It's been, we've got 2 acres under cultivation here with 4 small greenhouses, small orchard, small vineyard, grow a lot of different things. And it's really a cooperative effort. So there's a lot of different people that plug in, help with the work, help with share the harvests. But we grow a lot of different things. What we've learned over the years is greenhouses are incredibly productive because you can control the climate, you can get extra heat in there. So we have really at this point, any tomatoes that we grow and any peppers are almost entirely done in greenhouses just because it's so much more productive. But a whole lot of other things, and including pest management, which is a big one, because of one of my sayings with pests is that something wants everything, whatever it is. There's some sort of a pest, whether it's a microscopic fungi or virus, all the way up to 4-leggeds with hooves and everything in between. Everything has preferences, and it really becomes a question of pest management and what it is, what's the most effective way, and how do you try to do it as organically as possible. So that's always an art. We always lose some to pests of different kinds. There's always a new twist every year. Maybe a new type of pest shows up, but we continue to learn how to manage it fairly well, actually, I think. So any questions about that, don't hesitate. Janice asks about companion planting. Yes, I'm a believer. I need to spend more time really doing it, to be honest, in terms of what companions go with which, and then conversely, which plants don't like each other. So there's some plants that if they come out of the ground and then you plant successionally something after that, if you've got the wrong succession, if it's a plant that didn't like what was in the ground ahead of it, it's going to really slow it down and it's not going to do well. And we have a couple of charts and graphs. I think you could find some of those on the internet that help kind of talk about what are good companions and what aren't. And then some of them are really good for pest control. So if you put marigolds, mix marigolds in with things, some of the other types of flowers that are naturally pest resistant, they can help generally keep kind of insect load down and other things. David is pointing out in the chat box, Transition Garden. If you go to transitiongarden.ca, you'll see a lot of videos. You'll see a blog. Myself and other people put together a few years ago, and the blog is still fairly active on a lot of good ideas. Also, if you go to the Transition Bay website and you look under videos or projects, you'll see a video on the educational vegetable garden, and you'll see one on cooperative greenhouses where you can have a whole lot of people cooperatively using one small greenhouse to produce thousands of transplants. So there's a lot of different ways to do things as a community. And I think in the future, kind of that community cooperation is going to become more and more important, of people growing things together, learning those kind of skills together, I think it's going to be even more important every year that kids learn where vegetables come from. You know, it's absolutely amazing when you bring a bunch of elementary school kids, like first and second graders. A lot of them come out here once in a while on field trips. When they see a carrot come out of the ground, or when they see spinach growing and you pick a spinach leaf and give it to them and they say, wow, this is really good. It can be really, really dramatic moments for them. Just seeing how it actually, where it can come from a store, it actually is real. So thank you, David. This event's going to be posted on Facebook. And we have a Facebook page. I think you can get to it from our website, but you could probably also just find it on Facebook. And David, do you know, are there other past workshops still on Facebook?
We have a YouTube channel, and that's where they're supposed to be posted, but I'm not sure where it is right now. If Mel's still there, she would know.
Yeah, so we do have some videos up on YouTube, and we have a backlog that's not been posted up there yet. And if you go to our Facebook page, which is just Transition Bay on Facebook, the previous lives are available there and are found under the video tab as well. So we do have some in both places. And again, it's Transition Bay on YouTube as well.
Great. Okay. So we've gone over time, actually. It was supposed to be 90 minutes. We've gone close to 2 hours here. Thank you for some of the people hanging in here. The only last thing I want to mention is some of you have given donations, greatly appreciated. And I just want to put that plug out there again, that if you feel inspired, the work that we do, don't hesitate to go to our website. You'll see a link there for making a donation, and we always appreciate it. Okay, well, I'd like to thank everybody for coming this evening. We'll call it a wrap. Thank you.
Thanks, Bob.
Good to see everyone.
Thanks, Bob. That was great.
Thank you.
Good job.